Hello, my name is Ashley Delaney, and I am one of 3 science consultants at Heartland AEA. Welcome to another Zoom session to improve our teaching and learning in science. Today, we're going to be talking about the NGSS bundles of standards that are occurring at the elementary level. We're going to be focusing primarily today on the 3 through 5th grade levels. I have 2 guests with me. If you can just confirm, is it okay if I record with the 2 of you present?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to start today by sharing my screen. And the website that I am currently on is highlighted at the top of the screen. It is from Next Gen Science. And if you just do /resources /bundling NGSS, it's going to take you to this website. You'll see that it is a slideshow that is currently playing through at the top of the screen. But if you hover over this little arrow, you can actually download the entire document. Or if you scroll down, it's going to give you additional resources where you can search the bundles. So all 24 pages are going to give you everything that is in this searchable bundles. But what we're going to be looking at today is actually going to be both examples and how they've been bundled. We're going to start by looking at how the standards have been bundled and why we may want to use the bundles. And then we will transition into how districts have made storylines and units of these bundles. So really quick, what I just want to share with everyone is that I wanted to present this particular session because the bundles will provide a new pathway for thinking about how we may structure our standards and our curriculum. Previously, many of the districts that I've worked with are just using the resources that they have available to them to create units. In other words, instead of creating a curriculum map and then using that curriculum map to either create units, they are relying on their textbook or their FOSS kits or whatever resources the district may have to form units for them. Unfortunately, as we moved into virtual learning this spring, many districts discovered that that did not transition well to online learning. They had some resources that were conducive to online learning, and they had other resources that made it just very, very challenging to do virtual learning. When we are looking at shifting towards a new normal of virtual science learning, the bundles provide a pathway for us to seek out resources that we know are indeed conducive to online learning, so we can start building some of our own units. I have had a few other Zoom sessions that covered things like using mystery science, defined learning. We talked about the Iowa Governor STEM Council and the resources they've released. I've also done a couple of sessions on other science resources that are available through Heartland, as well as other science resources that we have curated just as a science team. So what I'm wanting us to talk about today is how NGSS has provided these optional curriculum maps, for a lack of a better term, that they're calling bundles. And we can then take this plethora of materials and resources that we have now available to use these bundles to create virtual learning units. Maybe you want to use Google Classroom. Maybe you would rather use Canvas. Perhaps your district has purchased Seesaw. Again, the idea is that these bundles are a pathway for us to create new units that are virtual learning friendly. So when we go into this document, if you have not already done so, go ahead and download the NGSS bundle guide that they've provided. And this is going to give you some example bundles. Now, they have bundled in 2 different ways. They have bundled by content, which is going to be things like earth science, space science, life science, physical science. And they have provided bundles that are thematic. So like the moon's relationship with Earth. And then maybe you're going to study tides, but you're also going to look at eclipses and you're going to look at the phases of the moon. So those are going to cover more than just the standards that are Earth and space science. Now that may be the primary focus, but you know, the changing of tides impacts tidal pools and how the organisms in those ecosystems work. It impacts the way that our communities have been built on shorelines all over the United States. So there's all sorts of different ways that we can think about these themes, but NGSS has provided some example bundles that we may want to look at. I'm going to actually skip all the way down. However, I would highly recommend that you read the introduction and the guide that's been provided by NGSS, because the definitions and why they have bundled the way they have bundled really will shape the way that we are able to use these bundles. So for an example, I'm just going to go over this part really quick because I think it's the most important part about why bundling is important. What they really learned is that teachers were having a hard time taking that full year of instruction and breaking it down into bite-sized pieces that were usable in their instruction. So for an example, in kindergarten, they've taken an essential question and created thematic units. These are not content-based units, they're thematic units, and made that into 3 very bite-sized units that a kindergarten teacher may want to use. Again, you can go back. They also have it by content. So I'm going to go ahead and click down to the appendix. The appendix is going to tell you how to read the standards, but it's also going to tell you basically their thought process and the evidence that they used to create the bundles. I like this because when you're doing professional development or you're reading into how to use these bundles, you can really see how they've broken down each part of the essential elements of the standards and married them with other standards. Sometimes I think it's really challenging to take someone else's thinking and share it with others. NGSS, I think, has brilliantly done their due diligence in collecting how their metacognitive process for creating these bundles, which makes it very accessible to people who were not on those bundling teams. And maybe more importantly, if the bundles don't fit perfectly into the resources you have access to, they have shared their process so that you can create your own bundles. Or perhaps you're a kindergarten teacher and instead of 3 units, you want 4 and you want to break down that large middle unit into 2 separate units. This gives you the option to do that. And so it really is something that is usable, it's user-friendly, and I think it's very teacher-friendly. So that's the example bundle guide that I wanted to share with you. When you come down a little bit further, I just want to show you that they have these example bundles that will give you a year of instruction that you can take and use in your own classroom. So I'm going to first click on the thematic model for 4th grade. And when we go into this thematic model, the course summary and flowchart is going to give you your year-long overview. Okay, so this document is an inch deep and a mile wide. So if you're trying to actually do your instructional planning, this is not going to be the best document. If you're trying to just look at what resources you may need or what standards you might need, if you're trying to set up a standards-based report card, this is an excellent document to refer to. So you can go ahead and scroll through and see the estimated time that they've offered, the essential element or the essential question for each bundle, which we may call a unit. And then you can see what standard they are actually covering in each of these bundles. You'll notice that there is 3 through 5 engineering and technology standards. I just want to emphasize that these do not change in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. They are grade band standards and skills, whereas the actual standards that are presented that are grade specific, you will notice have 4 and then physical science 3-2. I also want to emphasize here that these are estimates. you may have a difference in time in your classroom. The time estimates are based off of having 45 minutes every day in your classroom, and your classroom may not have that much time for science. So you may end up saying, well, I don't know that we can spend that much time, or I don't know that we have that much time to afford. So just keep in mind, you may have to alter what this looks like in your classroom. You may have to spend more time on one bundle than another. And perhaps maybe more importantly, you may want to look at how all of these standards are related to one another. And you may decide, okay, great, bundle one works really well for physical science for us. But the reality is that bundle three, we would rather cover earth science in a topical format instead of a thematic format. And so you may have to kind of pick and choose how these bundles lay out for you so that you can use them in a way that is functional for your purposes. I'm going to go ahead and click on bundle one of the thematic version of fourth grade. So again, now we're layering, right? We have the thematic option and we have the content-based option. And then underneath those options, we've got those flow charts. And then underneath those options, we have the details of each bundle. So when we're looking at bundle one of the thematic model of fourth grade, it's energy, motion, and weathering. And this model, they said, was going to take about 12 weeks. Again, you have your essential question. The summary here is going to be great for when you are trying to send out a newsletter to parents or an email to parents about what you're going to be covering for the next 10 weeks or 12 weeks. And then you're going to actually get a summary of how they've connected all of the DCIs. These are the learning statements that you're going to want your students to hit as targets. So when we look at this particular connections, this is the huge component where you as a teacher are going to need to make the explicit connections between these standards so that students can understand why they have bundled these pieces of learning together. So the concept that living things affect the physical characteristics of the region, and that the physical region affects the characteristics of organisms, is a symbiotic relationship. It's reciprocal. And so we need to be talking to our students about how they affect their environment and how the environment affects them. Right? So this is an important place for teachers to be reflective of what learning do I need to have for my own professional knowledge so that I can make sure that I am helping students make those connections while they're going through their learning. The other thing that I just want to point out here is that the performance expectations, those connections are made up above, but then the performance expectations down below are going to be like the I can statements. This is what you are going to explicitly be expected to both teach and assess. Okay, so this is going to be the formation of your assessments that are going to be really important. I always encourage teachers to make sure that they've got a formative assessment for each of these performance expectations, and then a summative assessment that is assessing all of them. This will help make sure that you're finding that balance between formative and summative assessments throughout your unit. The other thing that I want to point out is that there are these assessment boundary notes. A lot of teachers are going to think that those are the assessment boundaries for their classroom assessments. That is not what the assessment boundaries are. The assessment boundaries are the assessment boundaries for standardized and statewide assessments. So as we have people like, ACT forming our state assessments, they are using these assessment boundaries, not classroom teachers. So then the last thing I just want to show is that there are these practice building for the PEs. These are the skills that students are going to be using. So when you are looking at what resources to pull from in order to look at this bundle being a whole package, you're going to want to make sure that you have some sort of activity that has data represented in tables, or students that are creating a table of graphical display of some kind using the data that they have collected. So this is almost like a unit checklist. So as you're going back and you're looking at what resources you already have for instruction, you may go through and say, yep, our textbook does that. Yep, we have a reading that does this. Oh, shoot. Constructing explanations and designing solutions. You know, we didn't really actually have students do that. Maybe we want to consider the distributions of plants in a backyard and why putting marigolds next to a rose bush is or isn't a good idea, or why putting a rose bush in front of daylilies is a bad idea. That has to do with height. Okay, so we want to think about how our resources are either meeting or not meeting the needs of this bundle so that our students are getting a well-rounded learning experience. What I like about using this as kind of a checklist is that you are starting from the standards instead of starting from resources and trying to make the resources fit the standard. We want to go the other direction. We want to start with our standards and seek out resources that are quality representations of learning experiences that we want our students to have so that they can meet the DCI and performance expectations that this unit lays out. So I really like that this document helps us think in the appropriate, what's the most important part of this document. Same thing is available for the cross-cutting concepts and the connections that they want students to be making across scientific ideas. So when we think about these bundles, they're not just telling you what standards you're covering, what DCIs you're covering, they're also breaking down the skill set that students need to do. I'm going to go back so that we can look actually at a topical model. I'm going to pick third grade because I have a teacher who is teaching third grade on this call today. Again, they have this summary and flow chart. This one is broken down into 9-week units instead of 12-week units, so a little bit smaller, but that's because you're going to have the 4 main topics in science, right? You're going to have a life science unit. This particular one has 2 life science units. You're also going to have, I'm sorry, I misspoke. So when it talks about topics, it's going to be exactly what we want students to focus on, a singular idea. Okay, so this one is the trait of organisms. The second bundle is going to be the relationships of organisms. So we are going to be doing something similar as the thematic units, but not necessarily covering just one theme. We're going to be covering one idea that may cross over into other areas. I hope that makes sense. So one's like kind of a big idea concept. This other one is a singular topic, organisms. Okay, so it's not that one is better than the other. It's just that one is going to have a different kind of focus where you're answering a big, broad question, where this one is going to have a big, broad question, but it's going to have one idea. Okay. So we're going to go back and investigate this one a little bit just so you can see what I'm talking about. So when we go into this one, it helps students build the singular understanding of traits of organisms. So this is less relationship focused and more focused on this idea of traits of organisms. So when we go through, very similar structure, big heavy focus on life science, some earth and space science, because again, we're talking about there's a relationship that exists between these traits of organisms and the environment that they're within. But there is less focus on that symbiotic relationship. It's more focused on the organism itself and not as much focus on the relationship between the earth and space science back to the organism. That's going to be the other unit that was following this one. So we can go and look again. We've got these practices that are going to be building towards the PEs. So this again is your checklist as you're looking for what sorts of resources do you want to make sure that you have access to with your students that are going to allow you to explicitly instruct and assess towards these performance expectations. And so again, if you are a curriculum director, perhaps you're an administrator, and you're building towards the report cards, the standards-based report cards, this again is a great way to say, okay, so I know that I am going to be assessing the Earth and Space Science standard right here. And I know that this is going to be the exact activity we do. Here's what it looks like in the report card. Here's what it looks like in the evidence. And this is why we're making that connection. So these bundles are going to be basically a launch site for you to build or rebuild the way you are instructing students. If you should need to abandon the resources or the structure that you've been relying on in your classrooms, this is a great way that someone's already done the groundwork for you to start moving forward. Perhaps you're in the process of adopting curriculum. This is also a great place to start and say, you know, we really want to teach in a thematic way. We really want to make sure that our students are thinking big, broad ideas in science, not on a singular question. And so we really want a textbook that aligns closer to this topical model of NGSS. Or the opposite, you may want students to investigate something over a long period of time, but you want that common topical thread. And that's how your science curriculum is going to be set up. You may want to look for curriculum resources that align to that topical model. These bundles are available K-12. So you can look at chemistry bundles, you can look at physical science bundles, you can look at bundles K-12. And so I would encourage you to think very carefully about how the district wants to approach their instruction. Because if you have, you know, 3-5 learning that's happening in a thematic model, and then all of a sudden they go into middle school and they're only thinking in a very singular topic, that is a total shift in how the district is presenting science learning to your students. So you may want to have this conversation outside of your own classrooms, and you may want to have it with the teachers surrounding you, or even a district level team that is looking at science curriculum, because this shapes how kids think as well as their learning experiences. I hope that has helped. I would highly recommend, as you're going through these checklists and you're looking at these other resources, we will post the other classes that we've done Zoom sessions with on resources on the Heartland website. You're also welcome to get in touch with me. My email address is adelaney@heartlandaea.org. That is adelaney@heartlandaea.org. Hang on just a second. I didn't mean to end the meeting. I meant to stop recording, but I can't figure out. Hold on. There it is.